How many pages does it take here? We are doing Community CAP Program Managers Part 2, and this is called Hot Topics. And so I'm going to just turn it straight over to Brian Cordes. We did all the introductions yesterday afternoon, so that will all be in the recording. So if you want to hear the bios are all written out in the schedule too, so you can just go and read the bios in the schedule. But in the interest of saving time, we're going to just jump right into the presentation. I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. And welcome back, everybody, for part 2 of our training on Community CAP Program Managers. Yesterday we kind of focused on what the job entails as an individual and a professional staff person. Today we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to focus on strategy and policies. We're also going to leave a lot of time for questions from you guys. I know there were a lot of questions yesterday we didn't get to. So today we have Neighborhood Cats Executive Director Susan Richmond. She's going to be in the background monitoring the questions box, and if she can answer your question live and online, she's going to do that and just answer back to you. She's also going to filter out questions for the panel. So and we're going to take some regular breaks to get to your questions. So if you asked something yesterday and it didn't get answered, don't be shy about asking it again today. So we're going to start off with a presentation, and then we'll about half hour, and then we'll go into our panel discussion and taking questions from you guys. Okay, so I'm going to start off talking about just pure strategy, and that's how do you get the most out of your community CAP program? And the idea is combining. How do you combine a return to field program with targeting in order to get the most out of the resources you have in terms of population control and reduction and lowering intake and euthanasia into shelters? So let's get started. And the first thing I want to do is just define what do we mean by return to field. And this is just a real simple schematic. And the way return to field works is there's a community cat. He's there on Main Street, and a citizen traps him. But unlike your traditional trap-neuter-return, the trapper's intent is not to fix the cat and return him to his colony. It's to remove him from the environment. So after this citizen traps the cat, he drops him off at the local shelter. Now, traditionally, that was if this kitty was unadoptable for some reason, either because of temperament or the shelter was too crowded, that would be the end of the line, and the cat would be euthanized. With return to field, instead, what happens is the cat is spayed or neutered, goes to a clinic, has a night to recover, and then is driven back exactly where he came from. And now you can see he's ear tipped and he's released back into his environment, but now he's altered. So that's return to field. Now, a question that comes up a lot is, what is the difference between return to field and trap-neuter-return? And I think the best way to understand it is that return to field is a subset of trap-neuter-return, because you are trapping the cat, you are neutering him, and you are returning him, right? But unlike your traditional TNR projects, which are done through caretakers or nonprofits or other groups or individuals, these cats with return to field are impounded. They're actually intaked into the shelter, and then the shelter decides what the outcome's going to be. So if you're doing your normal TNR project, I might be a trapper, I'm helping the caretaker. We know from the beginning we're going to get these guys fixed and bring them back. And the shelter is not involved at all unless they happen to have a spay-neuter clinic that we're using. And we're making the decision as the caretakers what to do with the cats. In this case, the person in return to field, the person who did the trapping, is not deciding the outcome. It's the shelter that's deciding the outcome. So understand return to field as a subset of TNR, with that distinction that it's a shelter-based decision and a shelter-based program. So why stop euthanizing cats? And won't spend a whole lot of time on this. I think probably most of you understand this by now. But you know, for decades of euthanizing cats before the advent of return to field, shelters were not seeing improvements in their numbers, either in terms of intake, euthanasia, complaints, or the number of community cats in the environment. Meanwhile, euthanizing a high percentage of the cats that enter a facility comes with a lot of costs, and not just financial. There's very high stress. People really don't get into this field in order to see a lot of healthy animals dying, or being the ones especially who are performing the euthanasia procedure. There are research studies that show that people who are regularly involved in putting down other healthy animals suffer from very way above average rates of substance abuse and post-traumatic distress and suicide and all the other kind of mental disorders that come from high stress situations like that. As a result, these agencies often have very high turnover in staff, public relations are poor, and there are fewer adoptions because people tend to not want to go to those facilities. Not saying that's a fair thing, that's just kind of the reality of the situation. So why doesn't lethal control work? And I bring this up now because it's going to be very important for understanding how we are most effective in our strategy on a community level. So the most obvious reason is there's too many cats, and even if you wanted to round them all up and euthanize all of them, they way outnumber the animal control resources that would be available to do something like that. So and on top of that, you have the people who care for the cats, the caretakers, are going to resist, either passively by feeding the cats or not sharing important information, or some people will go and trip the traps or whatever it might be. So you're not just trying to catch cats, you're fighting a certain part of the community. If you don't capture all the colony members, all the cats in a certain area, they're left free to reproduce once you're gone. And typically with euthanasia as a policy, what happens is animal control, who's usually, again, way under-resourced for the number of issues they have to deal with on a daily basis. So when they used to do that, a lot fewer of them do that now, but when they used to go out and trap cats and just to bring them in and put them down, typically they would get a complaint, they would put out some traps, they would have no idea how many cats were in the area, they would come back later in the day, and whoever they caught. So it was a very inefficient way of going about this in terms of population control. And then there's the term I'm sure everybody's heard, which is the vacuum effect. And that's the idea that the cats are in a location for a reason, and that reason is that there are resources there that support them. There's food, there's shelter. They wouldn't be there otherwise. So the vacuum effect is really such a crucial concept when it comes to how do we strategize, how do we use our resources the most effectively, that I want to kind of make sure everybody has a real good understanding of it. So those of you who already have a firm grip on this, bear with me and maybe just enjoy the cartoons, but we'll get to higher levels of strategy soon. But important to the notion of vacuum effect is the concept of what's called carrying capacity. So these cats, community cats, are at a site because there's food and there's shelter, right? But there's only so much food and there's only so much shelter. So that particular site can only support X number of cats, and whatever that number is, that's what we refer to as the carrying capacity of that environment. And same thing holds true for wildlife. Like if you have a population of deer in the woods, there's only so large that population can get before there isn't enough food and there isn't enough whatever else they need. So imagine a grocery store that has a dumpster, and you'll pardon me for the trash can that I couldn't find a clip art of a dumpster. So every day the grocery store puts out X amount of trash in their dumpster, and then the cats come and they feed off of it. But it's only enough, in our example here, there's only enough food for 10 cats. So once the population gets to 10 and they continue to reproduce, nature takes over in its own harsh ways, and you're going to see disease, you're going to see tomcats killing kittens, you're going to see pregnant cats migrating out of the territory in order to protect their litters. But nature will find a way to keep the food supply and the number of animals in balance. So let's say we just remove the cats and they're gone. Okay, we get a trapper. We decide we're just gonna, whatever the shelter does with them, if they euthanize them, that's the way it is. So they're gone, no more cats. But we still have a problem, and I'm gonna look in the questions box. Tell me, what is the problem now? Cats are all gone. How come we still have a cat problem now? You can just put that into the questions. Other cats move in. Resources, yeah, exactly, you got it. So there's still a food supply. There's still an opportunity for cats to thrive here, and that's the vacuum. So you've removed the cats, but you haven't removed the resources that support them. And guess what? This grocery store is not off on an island by itself. It's part of a neighborhood, and throughout that neighborhood are other cats and other groups and colonies, and they're bumping up against they're not fixed either, so they're continuing to reproduce, and they're constantly hitting their carrying capacity, so they need more resources. And you've created that by removing all the cats from the grocery store. Now the dumpster's free for new cats, and sure enough, it's usually not that long before Adam and Eve show up and they say, lots of food, good territory, no competition, let's stick around and start a family. And within a couple of breeding cycles, you're right back up to 10 cats and the vacuum is filled. So that's why traditionally removing cats to euthanize them has a short-term impact, but within usually 6 months to a year, you're right back up to where you started. Now, when we do return to field instead, there's a lot of benefits. So instead of euthanizing the cats, we put them back. So obviously you have lower euthanasia. You have resources that are filled up to do other things. You have a less crowded shelter, so there tends to be less disease. Now that the facility has a low euthanasia rate, you saw from yesterday the dramatic drop in euthanasia in the very first large-scale return to field program in this country in Jacksonville, where they went from euthanizing over 11,000 cats a year to only 500. Well, now all of a sudden the public will support you, and they will donate, and they will come and adopt your animals. There's also culture change. It can be a very powerful thing. I know Jane can probably speak to this later about the change that happened inside the Albuquerque Municipal Shelter when they started letting these cats go, and it became a culture of saving lives instead of ending them. It makes for a much more positive experience, and for people wanting to be there. Outside the shelter, you're basically teaching your community that the shelter is not just a drop-off box where problems disappear. Instead, the proper way to handle community cats is to spay and neuter them and take care of them where they are. You also avoid euthanizing roaming pets who may not have identification when they come into the shelter, and they may be freaking out, and so they're mistaken as feral and potentially euthanized, whereas if you had just returned them, they would have gone home. So there is a return to field handbook. Not going to get into the nuts and bolts, because if you don't have a return to field program or you're looking to improve it, go ahead and download this book. You can download these slides and then click on that link and it's published by the Humane Society of the United States, and you can get a free copy. It's really a how-to with all sorts of practical information and forms and things like that. And you can just take those and adapt them to your facility. So, but is return to field alone? It's great for euthanasia, and I think it's an essential program for any open admission shelter. But can we do more, right? And not only, because the thing about return to field is eventually you want to be doing less of it, right? You don't want just the number of cats who are dying to drop. You want the number of cats you're having to deal with to drop too, right? So how do we achieve that? And that's going back to this idea of carrying capacity and population control. So here in this schematic, we have one kitty who has been returned to field, right? Now, if he's the only cat, he's the kitty we found on Main Street, he's been fixed, he's ear tipped, he's rabies vaccinated, he's back in his territory. But, and it's fine if you're looking for population control through your spay neuter, and he's the only cat there, then obviously he's not going to produce more cats. But how often is that the situation? I think in most trappers' experience, where there's one cat, there are more cats. So if this is the reality and you drop this cat back off on Main Street and there's 9 other unaltered cats in the neighborhood, you've saved this cat's life, which is an important thing, but you've done nothing to to have population control. Because remember, the carrying capacity is 10. And removing this one cat, even if this cat is female, if you remove this one cat from the pool of reproducing cats, the other 9 are still going to produce more than enough kittens to keep the number of cats around 10. So you've had no effect when it comes to population control. Now, on the other hand, if you drop this kitty off, and now you say to yourself, well, there's probably more, so let's look into it. I'm sorry, so this is what return to field only looks like on a community level. If you were looking at the whole town, you would see these pockets of cats in groups, and one here and one there would be altered. But if we go back and instead of just leaving this cat there, we do follow-up trap-neuter-return, and that would be the blue circles, and we get all the cats, or as close to all of them as we can, spayed and neutered. Now we have population control, right? Because now all of the cats cannot reproduce, and you've maximized your opportunity to have the numbers going down over time because they can't replace themselves. This is what we call colony level targeting. So this would be it's also referred to as the red flag approach. And that refers to the RTF cat is a red flag saying, hey, there's cats in this neighborhood. You know, we need some help here. And you follow up and you do that. So this is great, and this is one approach to doing this. And if we looked at it on a community level, this is what it would look like. So instead of just that one spayed and neutered RTF cat in red, now you've got all or most of the other cats in those groups fixed, and you're going to start to have declining populations. But then we have to ask ourselves, is there still a more efficient way to do this? Because there's a problem with this approach when we're just talking about population control. So let's go back to the grocery store. And now we, instead of removing the cats, you know, a cat comes in from the grocery store, instead of euthanizing him, he's spayed and neutered and he's brought back to the colony. And then we do our red flag approach and we spay and neuter all the rest of the cats, right? So problem solved, right? Not really. And can anybody type into the question box, why? What's the problem here now? I mean, it's good. it's better, but it's not optimal. Surrounding colonies. Okay, we have a great sophisticated audience here. That's exactly right. So let's walk through the steps. So now all our cats here are spayed and neutered. Over time, maybe some become friendlies, maybe some wander off, some of them die, and down the road we're down to 5 cats. Well, we have 5 cats, but the food source is still enough for 10. So now we have another, what I would call a partial vacuum, where there's more resources present than there are cats to take advantage of them. And I know when I started in TNR like 20 years ago, one of the adages that you often heard was one of the advantages of Trap-Neuter-Return was that the cats would guard their territory and they would prevent repopulation from other cats. And what I found was true is that depends on how much food is out there. So if you've got 10 cats and there's only enough food for 10 cats, then they're going to be pretty fierce about keeping new cats out. But if you have a situation like this where there's enough food for 10 cats, but there's only 5, they're not so concerned about it. And it's more like welcome to the party, and they won't go through the effort of fighting off what otherwise would be seen as invaders. They're more like welcome to the party. So that's what happens. Remember, as our audience member pointed out, this grocery store is surrounded by intact colonies when we're just doing the red flag approach. And sooner or later, some of them are going to move in. So probably you won't go all the way back to 10, at least, that will take a while, but you will lose some of the gains that you got. Now, how do we solve that? Well, we do community level targeting. So we don't just stop at the one colony, we do the rest of the neighborhood. We then move on to the neighborhood and continue to TNR in a strategic way. Rather than all over the place, we say, all right, this is, the grocery store is sort of our ground zero, and we're gonna move out from there. And if we spay and neuter and stop population growth in all the surrounding areas, there's not going to be any carrying capacity pressure. There's not going to be any need for these cats to find new resources, and you're going to defeat the vacuum effect. And populations are going to go down over time throughout the community. And this is something that we have seen. There's actually a case study about one of the very first large-scale TNR projects in this country that Stacy's original organization was involved in, the Merrimack River Feline Rescue Society. They TNR'd all the cats, about 300 cats along the riverfront in Newburyport, Massachusetts. And over the course of time, the colony went extinct. It took 15, 20 years. I think the last cat was 19 years old. He had 35 feeders, by the way, towards the end of his life, because people were so passionate about the program, and he was the only cat left to feed. But it showed that when the entire area is spayed and neutered, you get overall population decline, and you don't have a vacuum effect. And there were other things that were done too to prevent abandonment, like opening a local shelter and offering more low-cost spay neuter services. So it's not the only tool in the toolbox that you need, but targeting TNR on this community level instead of just individual colonies is a crucial part of that strategy. Now, this is what this looks like on a community level, right? So you're still doing your return to field, you're still getting the advantages of that program, but you're deciding like, hey, zip code number 3, that's our biggest problem area. That's where we look at our data and we see that's where the most cats are coming in from. So we're gonna target that area, whether there's return to field cats coming from there or not. And we're gonna try to defeat the vacuum effect. And when we're done there, then we'll move on to the next zip code. So that is what we call community level targeting. So you heard this spoken about yesterday, that about what happened in Albuquerque, and Jane can speak more to this too. And she did a bit yesterday, so I won't go into it in a lot of detail, but Return to Field was launched in 2011 at the Albuquerque Animal Welfare Department. And so for about a year, they just did Return to Field, no follow-up TNR. In 2012, colony level targeting was added on. And then community level targeting had actually started earlier in 2010 with another local shelter that was limited admission, Animal Humane New Mexico, but they were primarily targeting zip codes that affected their intake, not necessarily the municipal shelters. But then I think Jane can confirm that as time went on, the program associated with the municipal shelter also started to do community level targeting and not only the red flag approach. So these programs can evolve. I think in the beginning it made sense to follow up on individual colonies and work throughout the community, but then as time went on, the program started to become more strategic and reached a point where they were looking at entire areas and not individual colonies. And this is what the results were. They were pretty dramatic. If you look at 2010, when nothing was going on, you've got euthanasia around 5,000. And then in 2011, they introduced just the return to field part. And you can see that euthanasia immediately took a dramatic drop to, it looks like somewhere around 3,500. But notice that intake didn't really change at all, which makes sense, right? Because there's no targeting going on. There's no population control from that return to field program. Now in 2012, the red flag approach was added, plus you have this private shelter doing community level targeting. And not only do you continue to see a significant decline in euthanasia, the red bar from the return to field, but you start to see intake dropping. And each year afterwards, you see not only euthanasia going down, but you see intake going down as well. So this combination of return to field and targeting in some form not only gets you fewer cats dying, it gets you fewer cats entering the shelter. And just to show that it wasn't just a one-off, in Albuquerque, this program was done, initiated in 6 different shelters, including Tucson. And over the course of 3 or 4 years, these programs were initiated. I believe Best Friends has had quite a few more of them going on, and it's now their standard approach when they work with a shelter. But anyway, you can see that over the 6 different shelters statistics using this combined return to field targeted TNR approach, you get an average decline in intake of 32%, of kitten intake of 40%, and euthanasia down 83%. So different parts of the country, different situations, different shelters, same approach, and you end up with pretty dramatic results. The only outlier here would be intake at the city of San Antonio. And that was a phenomenon that what we observed there was that the shelter had been avoiding taking, had done everything they could before this program not to deal with cats and not to have them coming in, because there was almost, there was a very, very high euthanasia rate. So the way they dealt with that was keeping cats out of the shelter. As soon as they became known as like cat friendly, like they were going to spay and neuter the cats and bring them back, all of a sudden there was this, in that first year, there was a tsunami of cat intake. And eventually over the next couple of years, that downward trajectory took over. So there was a huge uptick in year 1, but by the time you got to year 3, it overall was starting to go down. So how do you identify these high need areas to target on a community level? And here's some suggestions, which is to break down intake. Look at, you should be recording zip codes and where cats come from, and then do GIS mapping. You can, I know Angeline spoke about mapline.com, that was a program you could use. This is a simple Google map where you basically enter a lot of addresses and then it maps it for you, and you can begin to see what part of your community are the most cats coming from and target those areas. You can also do the same thing with complaint calls or requests for assistance. So even if you're a nonprofit TNR group and not collecting shelter data, you can still, when people call up for help, ask them where they are, ask them what their zip code is, and then just map that address. And then finally, there's what I call tribal knowledge, which is when you have groups and you have animal control officers and shelter staff who've been working in the community for some length of time, they may not have data handy, but they know where the problem areas are. Another clue is there's generally, and this research study confirmed it, there's generally a correlation between economic income and the number of community cats in that area. And this was a study done by Gary Petronic in Boston. And you can see on the left shows income. So the darker the red, the lower the income. And so the dark orange and the red are your poorest areas of Boston, the city of Boston. If you go over on the right, this is annual cat intake, and you can see how, and the dark orange there is also the highest cat intake, and you can see how the highest cat intake, the dark orange areas in the chart to your right, correspond almost exactly to the lower income areas in the chart on your left. So that's a big place to start looking. So I mentioned yesterday, I'll say again, you can, all these tactics and that I'm talking about today are gone into in a lot more detail. I'm sure we've learned a lot as a field since this book was published in 2014, but it's still a good starting point. So go ahead and download it. You can download it as one of your handouts today. Or if you'd rather have a print copy, you can still buy them on Amazon. And thanks to PetSmart Charities for allowing me to continue to distribute this book. So I want to add one more thing that's not part of the return to field targeting, but that's another tactic that's talked about in my book, Community TNR Tactics and Tools, just so you get a full picture. And that's the idea of grassroots. And the reason that getting the public involved is still important, even though having a colony fix here and there is not necessarily the most efficient use of your resources, it's still very important to do. And here's why: because we may not be in Feralville, we may be in Feraltropolis. So we may be in a very large area. And when you're doing community level targeting and you're going like one zip code, one area at a time, this is what it looks like in the beginning, right? You've decided this zip code number 4 is your highest priority area, so you're going in there and you're working it and you're getting a high percentage of the cats fixed. But if that's all you do, it could be 20 years before you get to some people who are calling you asking you for help, and there's only so much your program is going to be able to withstand telling people we're doing a targeted strategic approach and we're scheduled to get to you in 2036. That's really not going to work for your organization's fundraising or image or brand, and it doesn't give any satisfaction or relief to other people in your community who are not in the targeted area. So if instead you don't just do community level targeting, you combine it with colony level that's performed by the public, then it starts to look like this. And you may not get to some area for quite a long time, but there'll be some activity happening there too. And if people are well trained and they know to get all the cats in the area, in the colony fixed, you're going to start having little pockets throughout the community where there's at least some population reduction going on. And it's the combination of this that's going to get you the maximum amount of population control over time. So how do you build the grassroots? And I know Angeline talked a lot about that, and the programs she has are a real good clue. But basically, you need to create a pathway for those who are seeking help and are willing to participate. So your trappers, your #1 nonprofit partner, your key volunteers, they're doing the community level targeting. They're going into these tough neighborhoods and where the most cats are coming from. They're working there. So you can't give that to everybody in your community. You can only do that at a select location or two at a time. But what you can do is make it possible for other people who are willing to be hands-on to participate and do the work themselves. While you're creating a pathway for them, you're building awareness about Trap-Neuter-Return, you're building support for it, and you will have population impact over time. New York City has largely been a grassroots approach. We've done some targeting and we're doing some now, but 95% of the TNR that's happened in New York City over the last 20 years has been colony level, one at a time targeting. And it's taken time, but like I mentioned to Sarah yesterday, when I started cat intake into the shelter was around 20,000 a year, and now it's like under 9,000. So it's had an impact. So how do you do this? Well, as I mentioned, you're creating a pathway, and that involves a network of supportive services. Again, very similar to what Angeline was talking about yesterday. You're providing training. Training is a lot easier to get now because the Community Cats podcast hosts the Neighborhood Cats TNR certification workshop every month. So all you have to do is get on your computer, have people get on the computer for 2.5 hours, and they're going to be adequately trained. You have to provide traps because people aren't going to go out and buy a whole lot of equipment just to fix the one colony of 6 cats in their backyard. You need to provide that for them. And you need to provide guidance. They need to be able to call someone up and get advice or some assistance if need be. Of course, spay-neuter is a crucial element. Having it free or low cost is ideal. I think the thing to keep in mind, especially these days with the veterinary shortages, you're trying to get it as low cost as you can. The lower the cost it is, the more people you'll bring into your program. The higher it is, the fewer. So there's a direct relationship between participation in grassroots TNR and the cost to the individual caretaker. So do the best you can to get that surgery down. So we used to have free in New York City for everybody, and now we're sponsoring clinics where it's 120, but that's what we have to deal with right now. Caretaking, providing food for people. If you can wrangle a free trailer of food from a pet food company, or your local pet stores may have a basement full of, recently expired food, whatever you can do to help people with that, because a lot of caretakers are struggling to afford the food for their cats. And then shelter. Winter shelters. In New York City, Neighborhood Cats does winter shelter. We work with somebody who manufactures hundreds and hundreds of winter shelters. We then offer them at cost to our caretakers. And I think this year we distributed around 700, 800, or 900 of them. I'm not sure the exact number, but it was quite a few. So just a last word is that all 3 of these tactics that I talked about today, mobilizing the community, that would be the grassroots approach, doing targeting, targeted TNR, and then return to field, are all part of a new series that we're offering this year with the Community Cats podcast. These are free webinars. All you have to do is sign up, and then you can either watch it live or watch the recording, but we'll be spending a couple of hours going into depth on each one of these. So go to communitycatspodcast.com and check out and sign up for these if you're interested. Okay, so at this point, I think we will go to our panel, and I'll ask our panelists to turn on your webcams. And okay, great. We got everybody online. So the first thing I want to ask you guys, and I'll start with you, Sarah, is how do you decide when you're doing TNR out in the community, your organization? So you mentioned you were working in East New York on a targeted project. How did you choose that? What is your basis for deciding where you're going to use your trapping resources?
We went through our intakes, I think, for the past 5 years, and we found where the most kitten deaths were coming from. So kittens that came into the shelter and either had to be euthanized at the shelter or died in care or were brought in as DOAs, dead on arrivals. We went through that and we figured these would count as preventable deaths because kitten deaths seem like they should be preventable. They should not have been born in the first place. So we found that most of those kittens were coming from near the shelter. There are a lot of colonies in East New York. It's a very low income area, which is why the shelter was built there. And so we started targeting caretakers that had, so the caretaker we worked with first, he had brought us some kittens that had passed away. And so we worked with him. He had 20 cats in his colony. So we worked through those and now we're working the next block over. We're really slow. It's a very small project. It's our first one that we've done in a long time. So we're just trying to take our time. And of course, everybody speaks Spanish that we're working with. So we're really, it's interesting how it's working out. But
okay, great. How about you, Angeline? How do you do a lot of trapping with your team? How do you decide where to go?
Well, we are not short on phone calls. Our phone rings constantly all day long, and we get references from the county animal shelter as well, since our program physically sets traps for people. So they tell people to call us. So we just know where to go because we'll get calls all day. We'll have another 100 cats that we need to help spay and neuter. But our map really tells us when we're recording all of the addresses, our map will tell us exactly where we need to focus on, which is actually around the shelter as well. It's the lower income areas in Tucson that have the most cats and need the most resources.
And so what is it you're mapping? You're mapping requests for assistance?
Yeah, we're actually mapping everything. So we'll map phone calls of potential dumping sites, cats, free roaming cats. If people spot a colony, but they're not sure like who's taking care of them or where they come from, we'll even map that as a site. We need to go canvas and maybe knock on some doors and like work the community. But yeah, our map really helps tell us where we need to focus on, or maybe we can do 2 or 3 sites in one night because they're all really close together.
Okay, great. And how about you, Jane? You've talked a lot about your program, but you tell us, how do you decide where you're going to go? And
yeah, we're also not short on requests for service. We've got we'll probably have 3 to 5. If you can include the county, we probably have about 500 requests sitting there waiting for us right now. So it's a little bit different than when this program first began because, everybody was bringing cats to the shelter. A lot of it was people who didn't want the cats. But we had a lot of caretakers back in 2012 that they would bring the kittens in because they didn't know what else to do. But now that this program has been in place for so long, that's kind of changed because a lot of people know what's going to happen if they bring the cat to the shelter. So who's bringing cats to the shelter is quite a bit different now. It's more the concerned citizen that wants to help the cat. Everybody's kind of gotten the word out that, if they bring it to the shelter, we're probably just going to bring it back. So, and now we've got everybody calling us. Anything that comes to 311 that says the word cats, they refer to us. We've kind of tried to make sure own cat surrenders don't. And if somebody really wants to get a tame cat off the street, we try to get that call.
But how do you, Jane? How do you? I think that's a common theme, right? Is that the number of requests are high, and so you talked about doing community level targeting as one of your 3 prongs of your approach. So amidst all these requests for assistance, how do you decide what part of the community you're going to target?
it's going to be those clusters of areas on the map. So we're mapping the requests for service, we're mapping the return to field, we're requesting officer referrals. We usually try to move on a little bit quicker, but it's a little bit, and the exception is we really are trying to service the entire city. So we kind of have like hot spots that are operating in most of the zip codes, or at least each city councilor's area. We're not just working in one part of town, but we've got hotspots working in, 3 or 4, maybe 5 parts of towns, but the same concept, just operating 5 different places.
Right. Okay, great. So a lot of mapping, a lot of looking at data and using that to identify the highest need areas. So, at this point, Stacy, I think we'll take a Q&A break and take some questions from the audience before we move on to other hot topics.
Great. Okay. There was just one question for those that are out there that really don't believe in the vacuum effect, other than walking them through Farrellville and Farrelltropolis and the cartoons. How do you convince people about the vacuum effect if they are a non-believer?
Well, I can take a first crack at that. Usually lived experience is, the way that people are. So if you talk to animal control officers who were working a lot pre-TNR times, before TNR might have become popular in their communities, they'll have lived through this. They'll have gone to the dumpster and removed the 20 cats and then got the call 6 months later that there's 20 new cats there. So they see for themselves the vacuum effect. I know a lot of the TNR projects that we did in the beginning in New York City were places that had tried to remove all the cats. Like I remember one hospital we worked at where they had hired a private exterminator, and he had, well, they don't know if he trapped all the cats because he had no idea how many there were, but they'd spent quite a bit of money removing cats. And 6 months, a year later, they were still all over the place, and that's when they were open to Trap-Neuter-Return. So, that's why you never close the door on people, even if they're not agreeing with you. You explain to them, well, this is probably what's going to happen, and when it does, maybe give me a call then. So that's been my experience. How about the rest of our panel? Have you dealt with that, with people just not believing it? Angeline?
Yeah, definitely us in Southern Arizona, we have a lot of urban wildlife, and so coyotes are a big part of our wildlife population. And so I often get that question from like conservationists, people who really love wildlife. So I shoot back with research and information about coyotes and the coyote vacuum effect that has been researched for quite a long time. And there are more and more studies coming out about it. And so kind of, if they don't believe it in the cat area, maybe finding an animal that they might care more about actually kind of helps. And having that other experience from another species, it seems to like really help me at least kind of like break that barrier.
I think that
wildlife, the ferals. So
yeah, I think that's a great idea. And there's also research about coyotes that the more you try to exterminate them, the faster they reproduce. And I've seen that with cat population. I haven't seen data on that, but I have my own lived experience where there was the Fresh Hills landfill was the biggest garbage dump in New York City, and it closed one day. They just shut it down, but there were about 60 cats living there, and now all of a sudden their food source was gone. So that they started to get sick, and they, more of them died, but they started to have litters a lot more rapidly, and there were just kittens all over the place. And it seemed like to us that what was happening was their reproductive rate had quickened in response to their higher mortality. So, but I think that's a great idea to show research in coyotes and other free roaming animals. How about Sarah Jane? Have you had to try to talk people through the vacuum effect, or they wouldn't listen to you?
Yeah, I think ultimately when I get to that point with the person, where they're not really convinced by, by explaining the vacuum effect, it really is just kind of a plea to give this a try. Just give this a chance to see how it's going to work, because it just, my experience has been, it just, people have the illusion that we've taken some of the cats away. It's just things quiet down so much after we've been there, that there's usually, it just kind of, lots of times will just fall out of people's minds.
Depends on who I'm talking to. I think if I'm talking to, usually the people we deal with are people who want just 1 or 2 cats removed. So I don't argue, I just tell people most of the time, just like I don't ask people, I just tell people at this point, because it seems to work better when you're clear about your boundaries. We don't do this. I'm not giving you any resources to do this because this is against what we believe in. You can come back when you change your mind, and then otherwise I hope you have a nice day. If it's somebody more advanced than that, I will send them Dr. Hurley's video about bringing cats to shelters and her experience, because she used to euthanize all the cats. She thought it was the right thing to do. Then she turned around, and this is why. And I do send that out. But I think just being clear about what boundaries I have is how it works best, and just not giving them resources to do what they want to do. Because obviously they're coming to me because everybody else told them no. We're usually the shelter's the last stop, and if everybody else told them no, I'm just going to continue to tell them no until they figure it out or they bend a little bit, and they usually do. And then it's funny, those people are the biggest advocates for it once they bend a little bit, because we've had several clients that absolutely wanted these cats removed, and then once they did TNR, they were thrilled because all of their neighbors liked them a lot better after that.
Yeah, it's that lived experience. Any more questions, Stacy?
Yeah, so a question about resources in Spanish.
Where to find them?
Have,
good question.
oh, sorry. I collected a few resources in Spanish over the past couple of years, and I'd be happy to send that out. I just don't have it on me.
Yeah, what we'll do, we'll put it on the recordings page too. If you send it to us, we'll put it as a button on the recordings page too. All right, we have a question also, and if other folks from the panel have information to share, just email us and we'll put it all together and get it out to folks. One other question here is, so this person just started TNR, did their first trap and spay this weekend. There are many strays in this person's neighborhood, very passionate about animal welfare and would like to keep doing TNR, already working with people in the community, and would like to have a more granular information on how to get started with turning their passion into educating the community and doing TNR projects, and to get paid for it. As a project manager, any ideas on how to pursue this? This person does live in New York.
Well, your first step is going to be, especially in New York, to get TNR certified. Yep. So attend the Neighborhood Cats, Community Cats podcast training workshop. Again, that's online once, usually the first Saturday of every month, unless it's a holiday, then it's the second Saturday. But that's going to get you access to services that you won't have access to otherwise, like traps, advice with Neighborhood Cats will help with sending people out to help you. Be aware there is a real shortage of affordable spay neuter. We do have programs to try to at least lower the cost, but getting trained, everybody in the system is going to be able to deal with you a lot better if you speak the same language and you're trained. So that is basically the gateway into beginning to access the services. As far as developing it to the point where you get paid, you can go a couple of ways. You can start your own nonprofit, learn how to fundraise. Having paid staff is actually a good thing for a nonprofit. A lot of people like the idea of being all volunteer, but if you want to attract funding, if you want to attract more support, you're actually more attractive if you have paid staff, and that requires learning about fundraising. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait till Sarah and her staff retires. and then you can apply there. If anybody else has thoughts on that, please jump right in.
I would just be really careful about using the word educate when you're talking about going into a community that maybe you don't live in, because that can really turn people off. I like to use the word assist or help, because I learn more from the people I work with in the community than I ever teach them. You know, like, I think that's really important to go in with an open mind, be aware that there are going to be cultural differences that you're hitting. And I think getting involved, like, there are some really great rescue groups in Brooklyn, Brooklyn Bridge Animal Welfare, Brooklyn Animal Action, just a whole bunch of different groups you can start working with, start either volunteering or getting, like, they might have paid positions. It depends on what their grant situation is. And then just slowly working up to it instead of just jumping right in, because you might decide like you only like small aspects of it and you want to be more specialized, because it's a really hard field. I mean, Angeline, the stuff, like, she's not saying she gets bad calls because she gets only nice calls. Like, there are some, it's like working in a library sometimes. I guess that's what I can say. Like, you're going to meet a lot of people who need mental health services and they're not getting them, and you're the only communication they have with the government, and you're going to have to, like, learn how to let that stuff go and not take it personally, and it takes time to get there.
Not an easy field.
Okay, do I have time for one more question, Brian?
Sure.
Before moving on,
Yep.
You tell me when there's time, because there are plenty of questions.
We got a few more minutes.
Okay, great. Question for the whole panel and it just disappeared on me. With limited resources, what is your opinion of focusing on large colonies which may be self-contained, for example, mobile home park, and or have reached their carrying capacity versus many smaller colonies, 5 to 10, instead, in order that they do not explode? So maybe, I don't know who you want to have go first on that one, Brian.
I'll hand that off to Angeline. And what do you? Because I know you're doing a lot of trapping, so.
We do. So since we have our full-time trapper that works in the evenings, we often give them the smaller sites, like the 5 to 10 sites, because that can be easily done in like a night, hopefully, most of the time, if we're lucky. But the bigger sites, we find it's extremely helpful to, like a mobile home park, apartment complex, to have our volunteers with us. So, and we have big sites of like 12, 15 or more. Sometimes we had 65 cats at one place. It's very helpful to have your crew of volunteers there, because you can spread out, you can use the buddy system to be safe. We also find a lot of feeders that way, or talk to more people that way, because we're a bigger group. So while one person will be down the street and someone's coming home, we can kind of intercept and be like, hey, like, have you heard of us? Like, we're here in your community trapping cats. Is it okay if we place traps in your yard? And, you know, talk to them about what we're doing. But really having more people when it's bigger groups is helpful, and we do prioritize those bigger groups, those bigger colonies of like over 20, because usually those cats are, in our experience, they're sick, and the people with that many cats needs the most resources and they need the most help.
How about you, Jane? You have a constant tension, I guess, between the smaller, requests for smaller. Do you nip them in the bud, or do you go after the ones that have already exploded?
A really good question. It's a question that's been on our minds a lot lately, just as our resources get a little limited in one of the jurisdictions. We've kind of approached it up till now with just attacking the larger colonies first, and we have kind of whittled down to where we're kind of 20 and under. And we had a lot of colonies that got up to 30, 40, 50, 60 cats. So mobile home parks we have backed down on just a little bit, because they're going to automatically be in that 40 to 80 cat range, and I think they are more self-contained. They aren't going to, they kind of meet their capacity. At least that's what we're telling ourselves. Some of them have an amazing capacity though. I mean, I think we got 120 out of one of our parks. There's a couple parks that are pretty big exceptions to that, though, because they bring cats to the shelter. We've got one trailer park. I don't know quite what the difference is, but we've had return to field at probably 6 different locations in that park. And then other mobile home parks, just probably more disenfranchised, aren't going to use city resources, don't really call. Maybe somebody will call, a colony caretaker will call, but they aren't going to take cats to the city. So, they aren't on our radar as much because of the city intake isn't there. But those ones that we are getting a lot of cats from, we probably will revisit. But I think there is some value in nipping some of the smaller ones in the bud. And we do provide the colony caretakers to do their own trapping. So we do have, we allot a certain number of our surgeries for the colony caretakers to do their own trapping, and then we allot for the community level trapping. So different theories on how that should be distributed. I don't think we have a very good answer, but we mostly work with the bigger colonies down up till now.
And Sarah, how about you're not dealing so much with allocating trapping resources, but you still, I'm sure, have to make decisions about where to focus, within New York City.
Yeah.
How do you make those decisions?
Yeah, what we're trying to do at the shelter is fill, because there's a huge TNR community in New York. There's so many people that if we had enough surgeries, I'm pretty sure New York would be fine cat-wise. So we're not trying to cover that. There are a lot of people that are doing TNR. There are a lot of, everybody's on the ground. We're trying to meet the people who cannot or will not. So a lot of our clients that bring us cats, we only do 1 a week with a client. That's the rule. We can't handle more than 1 cat a week with somebody we agree to work with. And I know that sounds awful, but we've cut back surgery. We only have surgery on Wednesdays and Fridays through the ASPCA. We're really struggling, honestly. We're trying our best, but we save 3 slots on each surgery day for community cats. Those are filled by the SNR requests we work with, and keep in mind, it's over 3 locations. So I'm just talking about Brooklyn right now. We have slots in Manhattan, so it's actually more cats than what it sounds like, but still not that much. So we tell the person the day, the time they can drop off. We do the recovery for them. We have people who take Accessoride to get their cats to us, and they lie to the drivers and say that it's their personal cat. We got a grant to provide lifts to people so that they can get to us. We tell people it doesn't have to be you that brings it in, it can be anybody. So we're just trying to really fill the gap between the TNR community and the shelter community so that we're not doubling down on something that's already being done.
Okay, great. Got another question, Stacy? We can take one more.
Okay, one more. Okay, let me make my make a choice here. If you could give one piece of advice to someone trying to create a community cat program in their organization, what would it be? In this person's perspective, they work in a municipal shelter.
I'll hand that off to Angeline.
A tough question. What I would do is check your data. See number of intakes, number of euthanasias for cats based off behavior, see if you can do a return to field program. But really the research, I always say the more research you have and the data that shows it's going to make an impact in your community and for your shelter, the better. And then speaking with administration on how you can push it forward and work towards that goal.
Okay, how about you, Jane?
Yeah, I would start at that point. Yeah, I would start with the return to field. I think that would be the place to start.
And that is often where communities do start, especially if you're dealing with an open admission shelter with a high euthanasia rate. If your first step is to get that euthanasia rate down, that's an immediate success. It frees up a lot of resources, and then you can start to build more programs around that. So I've often seen shelters that have these more sophisticated combined programs, but just like in Albuquerque, they started with return to field because it has an immediate impact Every surgery is a life saved. So that's a good place to start.
My advice would be to get your staff on board to make sure that they're involved with the decisions you're making. I know when we started ours, I think we just, and it was before my time, but I think we just told everybody we're doing this. It's not that simple. You got to have people on board that are in your organization that are going to be part of this, because if you just tell somebody who doesn't believe in community cats that they're going to be returning cats outside, they're going to thwart you. They're going to do things to like undermine you. They're going to not tell you about cats. They're going to, not because they don't like you, it's just they don't believe in it and you didn't give them any options to kind of get on your side. So I think getting your program, especially vet services and adoptions, on your side is going to be the key to making that program successful.
Yeah, Jane, you know, I know you in the beginning in Albuquerque, the ACOs, the animal control officers, were not happy about the return to field program, right?
No,
but they did. But that evolved, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the animal control office, other than the fact that they did have to do the returns for about 6 months and hated it, but and then they sent them back over for us to do. But they're very supportive of the program now, and almost all new people also. But there's a handful of them that are still around that are very supportive. You know, they'll refer people to us and talk to us directly about, you know, what needs to be done.
But you had to work through that culture change in the beginning, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so let's go return to our hot topics, and you know, when we get to about 10:30, we'll take another round of questions from our audience. So the next hot topic I wanted to talk about was, you guys are going to love this one because it's probably the most controversial. Which is, what do you do with friendly cats? You know, what do you do with, I mean, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, and Sarah's smiling because she has to deal with it every day. But, you know, there are, I've seen programs on every part of the scale. I've seen programs, and we're talking not just return to field, where that is really the kind of the focus of the controversy, but it also applies to Trap-Neuter-Return when you're pulling friendly cats out of colonies. I've seen programs that return everybody, you know, as long as they meet certain eligibility criteria. They're healthy, as Sarah was saying yesterday. They're healthy for a reason. They go back to where they were healthy. I've seen other programs that if there's any sign of sociability, they will not release the cats back outside, TNR or RTF. And I've seen everything in between, which are seemingly sometimes arbitrary criteria, like, well, if the cat's less than 4 months old, then he doesn't get returned, or if he's, you know, a certain weight or whatever it might be. So that has even led to lawsuits. Interestingly, the groups that are the most opposed to releasing friendly cats are the rescue groups. It's a kind of a civil war within the animal welfare community right now. So this is the day for hot topic. So I'm going to hand it off to you, Sarah, to take the first shot at it.
So we, as I said yesterday, we focus on health and situations. So if a cat, we get the stray cat history, the cat's part of the fabric of the community, it's healthy, it's thriving, that's what we focus on. But we do get a lot of pushback about friendly cats going out from either the clients, rescue groups, or staff. And I have a folder full of examples of why we should be focusing on health instead of behavior, because I have owners who have sent me furious emails about why I stole their cat. I have people that are thanking me for getting their cat fixed that they brought to the vet when they saw its ear was clipped and found out that it had a microchip that traced back to us and that we had fixed and vaccinated their cat for free. I have indoor-outdoor cats that have been reclaimed after a well-meaning citizen has brought them in, and I've had caretakers flip out on me for people taking their cats and bringing them to the shelter. So I think like we have too many cats until like I would be fine with taking in friendly cats if I didn't have other cats in the shelter that had zero options and needed a home. And then there's the other part. You're taking this cat that's used to being outside, you're putting it in a home that's not in its neighborhood, and then that cat might break out of that house into a neighborhood it is not familiar with, it does not know, and it could end up dying that way. Or it might just not do well in the home, and that person who adopted can't just let it back out. Like I'm fine with caretakers or community people in the community adopting friendly cats in their community, because then that cat has an option, it has a safety net, it can go back out to a place it knows. But when we're relocating cats to different neighborhoods, which is how New York, like you adopt a cat in Brooklyn, you might live in Staten Island. I just don't see it working here.
How about you, Jane? How do you deal with friendly cats?
Yeah, with the colonies that we're trapping, it's pretty much we put back everything. Anything that weighs 2 pounds that our vet is willing to fix that's healthy enough to go back goes back. There's a handful of exceptions. There's that cat, in certain situations, if the cat walks up to just anybody and rubs up against their leg and it's over the top friendly and we've got a rescue group that can take them, we'll talk to the caretaker. And if the caretaker is the primary socialization for that cat, it's not a neighbor's cat, and they want some relief, they want it home, then we might pull 1 or 2, very, very few. We don't get too much backlash from rescue groups. If they wanted more cats, they'd ask for them, and they don't. So where we get the most backlash is probably from our volunteers in the clinic that are recovering the cats. And I think it's hard for them to see, just get a whole litter of just perfect little Siamese kittens that are just gorgeous and exactly 2 pounds and probably could be socialized. And it's just pretty cut and dry. They're going back, and it's like sometimes they'll adopt one up, but it's almost always more trouble than it's worth. It's like they'll take it home. It's not as tame as they thought it was going to be, and somebody in the neighborhood does throw a fit, and and then. Did you want me to go into the return to field part of it also, or is that later?
Oh, yes, sure.
Yeah, our shelter, Albuquerque, always has been pretty stubborn about putting back owned or tame cats, and I've always been pretty supportive of that also. It's not my favorite thing to do. This year, things have gotten a lot rougher with our shelter. Part of it's, just not having the employees to service the animals in the shelter, just being shorthanded, and just more cats and dogs, I guess. So they have been pushing that a little bit. They say 4 months, but we've had smaller kittens. I find little feral kittens really easy to return. They just truck right out of that, head right home, as long as they know that front yard where they're going. The only problem is if they've never been in the front yard, but it's really the tame cat that, I don't know, sometimes you just have a sense about it. I've returned a lot of these cats, and there's a sense that this cat was just recently abandoned, or this address isn't right, or something, and I just can't sleep at night if I put that cat back. It gets down to the point where I just feel like, I think it's better for this cat to be euthanized if that's what happens, because I just, it goes and it cowers in a shrub and cries, and it's like I can't really deal with that. I go back an hour later and it's still doing it. It's like, all right, you're coming back, you're going back to the shelter. We're usually able to accommodate it. Usually they're going to go into the working cat program, or I'll shoot video of how the cat's behaving out in the field, and it's like climbing on me, or let me pet it and purring. So it gives them a perspective of what that cat's doing outside of the shelter too. So we push, and they respect our opinion on that. So I don't think we're in a position where very many of these cats are getting euthanized that we bring back.
Great. How about you, Anjali? You must trap a lot of small kittens and some friendly.
Yeah, we do. We trap on a pretty large basis, and we do come across a lot of really friendly, sweet kitties. But there's just not enough shelter space for all of the cats that we trap that are friendly. And we just are not able to prioritize like the coordination of intaking these cats a lot of the times, because we're so focused on trying to do the big picture of trapping, spay, neuter vaccinations. So what we try to do in those situations, of course, we'll there are cats where we cannot return and they absolutely need placement somewhere. So if we think it's a treatable condition, we'll reach out to, you know, our shelter. The Humane Society often can take in the cats. If not, we partner with a bunch of local rescues and just let them know what we're dealing with. We're open. We're like, hey, we would love to take in these cats, but this is what's going on. And if they can take them, they can. That's great. But we really try now to empower the caregivers themselves to try to find homes if that's what they need, to make appointments with the shelter, to kind of take control of this, kind of feel empowered to do something about it themselves. Because if we just come in, we do all the work for them, we take away a bunch of the cats, in 2 years, they may just have a bunch more cats and they're going to expect us to come and remove them. The biggest backlash we get is actually from our volunteers and from like people in our clinic who see these friendly cats and they beg me like, oh, please, can you find a placement? And I want to say, well, can you help me find a placement? Can you please call these rescues? Can you foster the cat? Can you do something to help it? Because the assumption that it's all on us and our program to solve everyone's cat issue, place every friendly cat. I wish we could do that, but we just need more community support if that's what they want. And we need the caregivers to be a part of that solution if that's really what they want.
Yeah, that really rings true to me. It reminds me of when, you know, Neighborhood Cats started in New York City, and the way, you know, the very first colony that I worked on, we were going to find homes for all the cats, all 30 of them living in a courtyard, and kind of quickly found out through one volunteer's destroyed sofa and various other things that not all cats do well indoors. So then we decided, well, at least the kittens, you know, we can find homes for them. And then months of socialization and veterinary, thousands of dollars of veterinary bills later, we're like, well, that doesn't really work either. So when we got out of our own immediate colony and started working with other people's, we did what you described, Angeline, which is we said, if you want these kittens placed, you're going to have to foster them. We'll post their photos on our Pet Finder page. You know, we'll give you ways, you know, to find adopters and things like that, but they're your cats and it's your decision and your responsibility. We'll support you, but we will not just have them taken over. And I think, like, the theme that I have an interesting question actually for you, Stacy, because the theme that I'm hearing in our panelists' answers to what to do with friendly cats, everybody's in part tied it to, not entirely, but in part tied it to what they're already dealing with in terms of friendly. They already have more than enough friendly cats. There's an overpopulation, basically. But in your neck of the woods, right, up in New England, you're not looking so much at overpopulation. So would you deal with friendly cats, you know, do shelters in your area, in the New England area, deal with this situation differently?
So interesting you asked this question of me, Brian, because yeah, Massachusetts, and there are many people out there in the attendance audience that are from Massachusetts, so they're going to chime in after I say my comments. But thinking about, you know, your typical TNR situation, there are many organizations right now that about 50% of the cats would come into the adoption program and get placed if it's determined that they're friendly and that there is no designated attachment, human attachment to that cat. So it's determined that the cat is a stray, sort of like Jane, the type of cat you were just talking about, like, you know, this cat's just not really meant to be out here. Or obviously the kittens, the 8-week-old 2-pound kittens would definitely come in and foster care. We have organizations that are keeping cats, friendly cats that are pregnant, coming in, they're putting them in foster, waiting for them to go to term so that they have kittens to place. However, with all of that being said, because of the veterinary shortage of the last couple of years, organizations are looking at their 2022 numbers and things are changing. So there's organizations that are getting litters of kittens in December and January up here, where we haven't seen kittens in December and January, probably for 3 or 4 or more years. So, and puppies, they're seeing puppies, also local puppies in the shelter. So that transports have slowed down significantly into New England because of the changing situation with regards to our pet reproduction levels, and it's because the limitations on our spay neuter programs up here. So it's changing, but yeah, we do still have capacity. We definitely aren't overwhelmed with numbers at this time of year. If in my world, if we were going to do a hoarding situation and deal with a hoarding situation, it was always going to happen in February. That was like the month that we would deal with. That was like designated hoarder month, like, you know, because February was the time that our programs had the capacity to be able to spread around the wealth, because we all knew they existed. So the question was, when did we reach out and do something about it? And that was always going to be our designated month.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put my 2 cents in, which is what Neighborhood Cats has always advocated is pretty much anything besides an autopilot approach, where that each cat needs to be individually assessed and within the context that you're working in. So capacity, there's no point in even discussing what are you going to do with a thriving, friendly cat who you're not worried is abandoned, or a kitten who you know was born. So there's no point in talking about what to do with them if there's nowhere to put them, and you're just placing them means another cat doesn't get a home. Okay, then it's a no-brainer. So part of that assessment is what is the capacity in the community, and then if there is capacity, then it becomes a matter of assessing that individual cat. How is he doing? How do you think he'll do? Is it a really rough neighborhood for cats where they come from, or is it a beautiful, suburban backyard where, they have a goldfish pond? So I think that's where we come from, is that there isn't a right or a wrong answer about the friendlies, except there needs to be thought given to the decision, not like, oh, the cat's, more than 4 months old, so he goes back, regardless of all the other circumstances, or he's less than 4 months, so he doesn't go back. That's just equally, I think we try as a field, we want to have these kind of guidelines that just put us on autopilot, but that's where it gets really tricky and dangerous for the cats. I mean, I know I had a community cat coordinator write to me once, and they about a cat who was outside a McDonald's restaurant and was going up to people and crying for food and wanted attention and was a little skinny, and then they got brought to the shelter, and the cat didn't fit the criteria for keeping because of age or something like that, and she was told, put the cat back. And she was writing to us saying, well, I feel terrible about doing that. I don't want to do that. Am I wrong? So that's where autopilot gets you into, because no, she was perfectly right. It was, you have to trust your instincts on these things. So leaving room to make individual decisions is kind of where we come down on this tricky issue. And I'll also say that, the one major shelter that is having a lawsuit from rescue groups did the autopilot approach and put a very friendly cat who was not doing well back into a bad situation, and then boom, they got sued by all the rescue groups because they didn't really look at that cat as an individual, and they had plenty of capacity to place him, but they got too dogmatic about every cat should go back. So that's my I don't know, does anybody want to react to that? Or?
I definitely agree that every situation is unique and different, and that you need to also know what the caretaker wants. A lot of people, please don't take cats away from people who don't want them removed. That's a big thing, is some people don't want their cats to go into a shelter, and that's okay. And and if the cats are healthy and they're cared for, it's okay, and it's great to leave them with the people that are caring for them, and save those spaces in the shelter for cats that really, really need it, because you will come across cats. I believe it was Sarah or Jane talking about the cats that, you can tell that they've been abandoned, and they're very friendly. Those cats, and it happens a lot in Tucson. We're very low income, and we're facing a lot of eviction issues here and housing crisis. So we do come across a lot of animals that have been dumped or put outside, or property managers call us and tell us that that happened. And so we do look at every cat individually, in every situation individually, and make sure that we communicate that with the caregiver. And then we also put the cats on stray holds for a few days, just in case someone in the community is attached to that cat and wants to take over their care, or it's their owned cat and it's not microchipped or didn't have a collar. So.
Okay, great. Let me segue over to another question, and actually, Jane, you had proposed this, which is, so this is very similar to the friendly discussion, but how do you handle disposition decisions around cats who don't clearly fit the criteria for being returned, such as they've spent a lot of, maybe they had a medical condition and they've been in the shelter for a long time, you don't have an exact address, maybe they're missing a leg, things like a declawed cat. So how do you, and they're not clearly sociable and friendly, so they're kind of in this in between stage. How do you decide what to do with these difficult cases? So
yeah,
Sarah,
it's primarily
go ahead, Jane.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Jane.
Shelter workers that are making the initial decisions, but if there's some ippiness to it, they will contact us and ask our opinion about it. We just had our first declaw broached, and we actually weren't asked about it. It was more of a, here you go. The volunteers from within the shelter weren't comfortable with it. I'm not real comfortable with it. It's kind of, everybody else is doing it is kind of the word we're getting, but I'm not sure we're comfortable with going there. I think that cat doesn't have a way to defend itself, mostly from other cats, but other dogs, coyotes, little boys, everything. But I don't know, we actually have somebody fostering him right now. Volunteer came forward and is fostering him, so that hasn't really been crossed yet. But usually the long-termers, we kind of talk to the shelter about, what kind of time frame are we looking at? We gave them some guidelines. It's like, we really want that decision made, within probably 3 weeks for an adult cat, a little bit sooner for kittens. But if they go past that and the cat's deteriorating, we're almost always willing to give it a try. It's like, well, let's get the cat tipped, let's take it out in the field, and usually it goes just fine. And we had one that he'd been in the shelter for, I think it was 45 days, and he gained like 8 pounds. He was huge. You could barely get through the fence, but he waddled over his food bowls, and all his buddies came running up to him. And we actually went back in there and trapped a couple weeks ago, because we had seen cats that weren't tipped in there, and it had been nagging at us. And a woman across the street came over and asked about him, and she's like, well, he comes to my door and asks for food, so we know he's okay. So that was after a pretty long stay at the shelter. So it's kind of a case by case, really, and the shelter, everybody's respecting each other's decisions, and we understand what the shelter workers are dealing with. We understand, like, this declaw is a little bit bitey in the shelter. He's not outside of the shelter, but he started, he was the declaw, so he's going to use his mouth a little bit more, and they don't want him to become a bite case. So.
How about you, Sarah?
So, if we don't have an exact address, I go back to not caring about behavior again. If I don't have the information I need, I'm not putting that cat in a position that I'm not comfortable with. I would never put a declawed cat back out, even if it was the most feral cat in the world. Obviously, like, you don't declaw, like, somebody's not paying to declaw a community cat. It's obviously had to have been indoor. Even if he was indoor outdoor, he's going to have to be indoor. He's going to have to retire and just be indoor only at that point. But we do put out leg amps as long as there's a caretaker. If there was a cat with a leg that needed a leg amp that we did not know the caretaker and it was fearful, we would opt for euthanasia, and if it was social, we would go the other way. But without a caretaker, I wouldn't be comfortable putting a medically heavy cat back out there. But with the caretaker, I'm okay with almost anything because they can always reach back to us and say, hey, this isn't working, and we take it back. But regardless of length of stay in shelter, like if I don't have the information I need to feel comfortable about that cat going back, however long he's in there, I'm not comfortable still, you know, even if he's deteriorating, I'd rather proceed with euthanasia or placement than try to put him in a position where he could starve to death. That just seems not my, yeah.
Yeah, there are boundaries, basically, yeah. How about you, Anjali? How do you, when you're doing TNR and you've got a difficult case like that?
Yeah, similar to Sarah, we talk to the vets and see what the situation is for each cat. If the cat is friendly and we're able to handle it, we'll definitely try to find placement in a rescue or a shelter. If the cat is fearful and it has like a minor injury, like it needs a tail amp or something like that, we can definitely get that covered and then return it back to field. Again, as long as the caregiver can keep an eye on it and it has like some type of shelter. So we often provide shelter. But if the cat is very fearful and its condition is extremely terrible, we have a lot of cats with extremely bad stomatitis and like mouth issues where they're no longer eating. They would need to have full dental, like all removed their teeth, but they're fearful, you can't handle them, they're deteriorating in the shelter. And then at that point, we also would opt for euthanasia. And that's an extremely hard decision to make. Sometimes I have to look at a cat and say, hey, like what is the most humane thing for this cat? Is it for it to be in treatment for months in a kennel and then be scared and possibly deteriorate to the point where it's like losing its will to live? You know, so we consider all of those options, and we always try to make the best decision for the cat, not necessarily like what's in our heart, but for the cat in that moment. And it can be very hard. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I will point out that so at Neighborhood Cats, we often work with Sarah on these difficult cases, and I think that the value of a collaboration, that kind of public, municipal shelter, private, nonprofit collaboration comes through, because you mentioned yesterday, Sarah, about the Department of Health and wounds of unknown origin, and it's a 6-month hold. So in the past, that would just be that cat's being euthanized, especially if he's feral, right? There's nowhere, but we've been able to, we have a strong enough TNR community in New York City that every time Sarah's come to us with one of these cats, we found somebody who will foster them for 6 months. And people may be thinking like, and then you put them back outside. Sometimes they socialize during that 6-month period, but if they don't, our experience is that if it's an adult feral cat, they know exactly where they are 6 months later. It's no problem at all. It's a problem if they're a kitten and you bring, and they were 3 months old and you want to return 6 months later, that's going to be way, you know, the window of opportunity for return is much shorter. We have cases where they come in with bad medical, you know, maybe a broken bone or something like that, and they only need a couple of months, but they missed, it's the middle of December now, and they didn't, in the Northeast, these cats have to go through the change of seasons in order to have a winter coat. So you can't take a cat without a winter coat and put them in the middle of a snowstorm in, you know, 10 degrees in January. Hopefully, it's usually not like that anymore, as often anyway. So anyway, I would just say, Sarah, you know, that the value of having that collaboration and being able, not just to us, but to other men, you know, the many, I don't know how many groups are in the New Hope program. There's dozens and dozens, I suppose. So it's a vast resource and network for the shelter to be able to reach out to.
Yeah, I guess I would add too that, like, when we're making these decisions about the cats and proceeding with euthanasia, I really like to talk about the 5 freedoms, because if you go through those 5 freedoms when you're making those decisions, it kind of really helps make the decision for you. And so a lot of groups would want to, like, we could place these cats that are not doing well, we could place them.
What do you mean by the 5 freedoms, for those who aren't familiar with 5 freedoms?
The 5 freedoms, I think I don't know if it's the ASPCA that wrote them, and there's the freedom to, I think if you Google it, it's like the freedom to express yourself appropriately, the freedom to not be in fear all the time. I know I'm botching them, but if you Google the 5 freedoms, it goes over like what, if you can meet those 5 freedoms, then placement's appropriate for that cat. And if you can't meet those 5 freedoms, if you're going to place a cat with a group and that cat's going to be terrified for the rest of its life, that's not a freedom. I think one of the freedoms is freedom to water, you know, nourishment. So that's another reason why I would not return a cat that didn't belong, that I didn't know it belonged there, because I wouldn't be meeting its 5 freedoms either. But so I go through that, so I know I'm not going to place a fearful cat with a group, even though I could, because we wouldn't be meeting its 5 freedoms by doing that.
Okay, great. Stacy?
I have to, sorry. Just to go through my little dashboard of the things that we've done. So we definitely have returned a cat after a 6-month rabies quarantine, as well as that cat had a leg removed, had a leg amputated, and it had been hit by a car. The cat was about 3.5. Michael was his name, domestic short hair, black and white. And it was behind Mike's liquor store. Therefore, that's how the Michael came. But anyway, cat was not happy for the 6 months. I mean, put up with the treatment and all that stuff. The liquor store owner really missed him. There was a colony there. And then you think, oh, well, he was hit by a car. You don't want to put him back in that same location. We returned him back. Everybody welcomed him back. He lived a long, good life. I think he died at around age 14. And so, you know, we did hem and haw over that decision, but at the end, it seemed like it was a pretty good decision. We have since 1994, we have placed 3 that I know of in my history, 3 declawed cats in barns. They were behavior issue cats. The barns were very, I guess I would say cushy, if I can say that. You know, the cat was going to be tucked into the tack room at night. The personality of the cat was such, it was a very food-driven cat, was willing to be that way. You know, usually the declawed cats have litter box issues and biting issues, as we've talked about. And so actually up here in Massachusetts, a lot of the barn cat placements involve behavioral issues rather than being feral. That's a much more popular barn placement type of cat. But anyway, so just from my standpoint, I have no problem with the declawed cat going to a barn as long as there was a commitment for the cat to get brought in at night. We train it, clicker train it basically to come in at night for wet food. And then, you know, and also not that we test or anything like that, but a healthy FELUC positive cat, if for some reason it was determined to be FELUC, I would have no problems returning that back to the colony either.
Well, you've just touched on another. Why don't we return to that? Let's take some questions from the audience, and then we'll start off with that idea of what do you do with positives if you find out anyway. But do we have questions from the audience?
Oh yes, we do for sure. There was a question about county ordinances. So if you live in a community that is more legal, in Massachusetts, there's not much legal stuff with regards to cats, but if you do live in a community that has county ordinances dealing with return to field, you know, what do you see in those types of ordinances?
Not clear whether they're asking about ordinances that prevent return to field or that promote it.
Let's go with promotion.
So I think where Angeline's working is probably the best example of legalized return to field, because there's actually a state law that defines, that allows for stray cats that meet certain criteria that are fairly loose to be returned to field and to eliminate the normal stray hold. So that's usually the biggest obstacle in communities to return to field, or when they have like a long stray hold. and the cat, nothing can be done with the cat until there's a week passes or something like that. And when you're dealing with especially a high volume return to field program, you want these cats to move in and out of the shelter very quickly. Otherwise, you don't get the benefits of less crowding, and the cats don't get home right away. And so you would probably, if you're looking to improve your ordinances, look to the Arizona law. We can send that out afterward. I don't have the citation. Maybe I should link that. I don't know, you might. I don't have the statute number off the top of my head, but we could find that and post it. But you want to work on eliminating. So the purpose of a stray hold is to give owners of cats and animals an opportunity to come to the shelter and reclaim them. That's a bit of a myth. Only about 2% of cats are on average are reclaimed, is the latest statistic I heard. So actually putting the cat back into his community as quickly as possible is a much better way to get that cat to return home. But be that as it may, maybe people still want to do that with cats who come in with collars or microchips or things like that. But for cats that have no indicia of ownership, you want to waive the stray hold would be the first legal thing to try to do. And I don't know, Angeline, do you have experience with that state law, or you've just been operating under it?
Yeah, I've actually just been operating under it. I believe the law, if I have it correct, it's the ARS 132910. So it's included under our animal cruelty laws in Arizona. It actually helps us a lot to have this ordinance in place, because we can tell people, no, you cannot relocate the cat. It is illegal and is actually considered animal cruelty. So we actually talk to people about that, because we get a lot of requests for relocation and removal. And so we're able to reference that law and have that kind of in our back pocket, which is really nice. But then again, a lot of people get extremely angry about the law being in place. I didn't have anything to do with getting the ordinance put in, and I don't know quite too much more about it. Other that it's there and it helps us.
I think it's unusual to have that on us as a state law. You know, more often you're going to find that as like a county ordinance or something like that. Yeah. So it's great to have it as a state law, but probably if people want to work on that, you're probably more realistic. It's going to be a lot easier on a county level than it is on the
It is, and I think mostly it's Pima County and like Maricopa County, like the bigger jurisdictions, because I know certain counties in southern Arizona do still euthanize feral or unadoptable cats. So I'm not quite sure what the difference are in like cities like Nogales and Douglas, who have kill rates in their 70s, 80s for cats. So we're still researching that and trying to understand it.
Yeah, I think speaking with my attorney hat on, the difference there is that the state law allows return to field, but it doesn't mandate it.
Got it, yes.
It becomes a choice.
The county is very heavy on return to field. Like our shelter, if we know where that cat, the address of that cat, they'll even provide medical care for the cat before returning to field, which is amazing. So.
Great. Have you had any experience with that, Jane, with the ordinances?
Yeah, our city ordinance has sort of an odd definition of owner, so it really kind of it says nothing about TNR, but it allows us to operate pretty much outside of the ordinance because these are unowned cats. The county ordinance, they did redo the county ordinance, and it pretty much went through just normal procedure without addressing TNR, and then it had one little clause that just decriminalized the abandonment part of it. If you were doing return to field. So it was that abandonment issue that had to be addressed, but it was kind of like a 1-2-liner thing that just kind of took that out of the realm of the rest of the laws that apply, because both of them have leash laws and both of them have pretty strict laws. So.
Okay, Sarah, do you have any legal? I mean, New York City's pretty loose that way, right?
Yeah, we mostly have to answer to the Department of Health more than anything. So it's not even about the laws. It's about what their mood is that day.
Fair enough. Any more questions, Stacy?
Some are just popping in here. So this is a person in Long Island who is asking that her town board is saying it's illegal to use taxpayer funds for TNR. But then some of the other counties in the area have funded. So how do you find out, number one, if there is funding for TNR? Like, I wouldn't know where to look if there's any public funding for TNR in Vermont. So how do you even find out if there are some public resources out there? And then if there aren't any, is it true that it's illegal, or is it something that we can propose?
So New York State's unique that way, in that it has some very ambiguous language in some of its statutes. So there was a statute that was passed before TNR was ever invented or introduced that was meant to address what was the practice at that time of shelters selling animals to laboratories. So in order to stop that from happening, it restricted the kinds of dispositions that a shelter could do with say, a cat or a dog. So it was limited to adoption or euthanasia or return to owner. So people use that law to say, well, TNR is not on the list, so it's not an allowable outcome under state law. And the county, the parts of the New York State that tend to follow that tend to be much more conservative in nature. And the counties that are more liberal, like New York City and most of southern New York and most of Long Island, reason that, well, the state law couldn't outlaw something that didn't exist at the time as a matter of statutory intent. And so they move ahead with Trap-Neuter-Return. And then there are other legal arguments that it wouldn't make sense for TNR to be illegal for a shelter, but then perfectly legal for a nonprofit that wasn't a municipality. So, but if you have a conservative government, or if they're leaning against TNR for some reason in New York State, they'll use that conservative interpretation to say you can't do it. So that's the first step, is to speak with them and get them to understand what the actual legal background is. And then when it comes to funding, all municipalities have a budget for animal control. I'm sorry, if you can hear my cat making a racket in the background. But let me hand it off to Sarah for a moment while I take that toy away, and see if you have any other insights on funding and municipal funding in New York.
Know that they do a lot of TNR and return to field in Long Island. So I don't know if you've reached out to the shelter there. I know I would reach out to various shelters, but I know it's a difficult and really like you cross over a street and then you're in a different place. And so I'm not quite sure about that in Long Island.
I have a question for Angeline, if we can switch over. Okay. Sorry, I had it and then it just bleeped away. Here, hold on, it's coming here. Okay. What do you do if the animals are in danger? Arizona used to list feral cats as legal game and allow them to be shot without penalty. Is that true?
That it could have been true in the past, but I'm not personally aware of it, but that's not true now. That is considered animal cruelty in our state, and I will happily report you to animal cruelty services. And we actually have an animal cruelty investigator at the Humane Society. We're very lucky. Mike Duffy, he used to work for the TPD and was a detective and all of that good stuff. So we actually can work with him, and he has helped us in several ways when we do come across like situations like that where there are threats involved, or we find a company who's actually promoting services of catch and kill of ferals. So if we find that stuff, we will send it over, and within a couple months, that's no longer on that website. So they do our animal cruelty investigators, they do some good work. It might take some time, but it's really important to report those types of threats to the county shelter so that they can keep track of them.
Yeah, well, you know, Stacy, I'm gonna switch over because we have one more hot topic and 10 minutes left here. So I wanted to ask everybody, our panelists, we've kind of referred to it here and there, but let's talk about it head on, which is the current veterinary shortage and how, two parts to that, how is it impacting your program, and what are you doing to try to work around it? And Jane, you want to start us?
I think it's having a huge impact on our city shelter, especially. We've secured a vet that we're able to do 120 cats a week, just about every week. We pull in some other vets when she's out of town or on vacation. We've had pretty good luck getting some substitute vets in, but it was a real struggle. There's a lot of competition for the vets, and where we're feeling it the most is that nobody else is doing the spay and neuter that they used to. So our 120 slots don't really cover everything that used to get done. So Animal Humane's kind of been out of the picture. They've had a hard time getting vets. They were doing a lot of owned cats. They were doing their own TNR, and they've been out of both of those for quite a while, unable to get vets. The city shelter's been limited. They were going to open another spay neuter clinic, and they haven't been able to do that because of a shortage of technicians at the time, but I think veterinarians now. And some of our private organizations or private businesses didn't really make a comeback after COVID. So there's a lot less spay and neuter. And I think the effect on owned cats right now, not getting spayed and neutered, is just rippling through everything. And it's just, I think we were sitting in a pretty good position, but we had a lot of spay and neuter, and we kind of put people in a position where, you know, there's not many barriers here. You can get your cat fixed pretty easily. And that just isn't the case now.
How about you, Sarah? I know you alluded to, you know,
we're really struggling. We used to have ASPCA surgery slots every day except for Sunday. Now we only have them on Wednesdays and Fridays, which is only 15 animals. We are able to do in-house, but it's usually 10 animals and it's only males. The community cat department, we've been able to make some relationships with teaching colleges. So we are working with LIU whenever their vehicle is working, but they've had a lot of difficulties just even getting the equipment to work because they have a neuter scooter that breaks down once in a while and it's not their fault. And it's been really stressful, and I don't know how it's going to get better. I don't know.
so you just kind of working through it as best you can?
Yeah, so since we've moved to this SNR, most of our community cats are coming in by appointment, and that's the only thing that's really saved us. Before, when we were just doing RTF, cats would just come in, we wouldn't know they were coming. We'd have to figure out when they would get surgery, and it was more okay before COVID. And now, if we were still operating that way, we would be drowning, and none of the adopted animals would get surgery because community cats in our shelter take priority surgery-wise. They're number one on the list. They get surgery first before anyone else because they're the ones who are going to decline first, and they need to get out, and they have placement. So if we hadn't switched, and we didn't mean to do it this way, but if we hadn't switched when we did, we would really be in a worse place right now. So luckily we're able to schedule people and we're able to have them trickle in by appointments. And then our admissions department is also much firmer about appointments now for owned and unowned cats. Like found cats, we'll try to get people to hold on to them until their appointment. But honestly, cats is not where we're drowning. It's dogs that we're drowning in. And I can't fix that, unfortunately. I don't know who can.
How about you, Angeline? How are you being impacted by this?
Yeah, we definitely see the vet shortage impact in Arizona. It's been better recently. 2020 and 2021 were really rough for our TNR. We would have to like bump, we called it like till the next day or the next day, our surgeries for community cats, which was really stressful because we often wouldn't know until the day of that they couldn't accommodate the cats. So that was stressful. Now what we do is like we have a better communication with our vets on what they are able to do surgery wise, and we now pay a separate clinic to do our overflow so we don't have cats waiting. But we see the impact of the vet shortage, and just we're well, first, we're very lucky and very privileged here to have so many available spay neuter compared to a bunch of other states. But we see the shortage in like the medical care aspect of the cats that need extra, not just the surgery, not just the vaccinations, but they need wound care and tail lamps, eye removals, antibiotics. That type of stuff has been harder to get, or more longer term care for cats, even if they're friendlies, like trying to get medical care for cats, no matter what their behavior is, has been a little more challenging. But right now we are also overwhelmed with dogs in our county and overflowing. The shelters have been overflowing since the beginning of the pandemic with dogs.
So just to offer a ray of hope in this situation, I think there are two possible ways out of this. One is that for a lot of years, Neighborhood Cats worked with the ASPCA's training center in Asheville, North Carolina. They have a spay neuter training facility that is not operating at nearly the capacity that it used to for all the reasons you can imagine. But when we would what Neighborhood Cats would do is we would sponsor veterinarians to go there and get trained, and we would pay for their all their expenses for that week. And the last time we did it, we had about 50 applications for 2 spots. So our experience, and that's been a consistent thing over the years. So our experience is that there are a lot of veterinarians who are already out there who want to do high volume spay neuter but don't know how. And I think that instead of trying to build more schools and bring in, all these things are important, but a more immediate solution would be if we had more training centers and more training programs, and veterinarians who wanted to do this because they're out there had a place to go, because they don't have that now. So that's one possible way out. And the other one is learn more about the Alliance for Contraception in Cats and Dogs, acc-d.org. They actually are pretty far along with a non-surgical sterilant, and that's the ultimate way out of this shortage. So if you don't know about them, it's acc-d.org. Go to their website, see how you can support them, and because I think we're a lot closer than we ever used to be to that becoming a reality, and that may be the ultimate way out of all of this. So at that, I think we're bumping up to the close of our session. I want to thank all our panelists. You guys have all been great, and really great audience. And thank you, Stacy, for being the usual pioneer that you are and giving us a platform to do this training.
Excellent. No, thank you. Thank you so much. Great conversation. Wonderful.